Welcome to the Learn at Work webinar series presented by the journal Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation, published by iOS Press in the Netherlands. I'm Karen Jacobs, the founding editor of Work, and I'm so happy to be with you today to moderate this very interesting webinar. And I'm going to turn it over now to our speaker. Tanya, it's all yours.
Hi, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I am nia Ferraro from Portugal. I work in University Portucalense in Porto. And first of all, I want to thank Professor and Editor Karen Jacobs for the invitation to participate of this webinar. For us, this is an honor and a pleasure to share the data about our research with all of you all over the world. During the webinar, we also count with the participation of my colleague and co-author, Professor Nuno Rebelo dos Santos. I think that, I don't know if he wants to say hello to you, and I don't know that if we can hear from here now, I don't know.
Hello, I'm here.
Hello. I don't know if Professor wants to talk a little bit about your...
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, our webinar is about decent work, work motivation, and psychological capital, and an empirical research. Here is the reference of our paper, and all colleagues, all the team that participate in this research, Professor João Manuel Moreira and Professor Leonor Paes. Well, our background, let's begin for the concept of decent work. The concept, decent work concept has been developed since 1999 by the International Labour Organization. And since then, it has become the focus of the ILO's agenda. Four main values underline ILO's action: freedom, equity, security, and human dignity. These values are expressed through four strategic objectives: standard and fundamental principles and right at work, employment, social protection, and social dialogue. These objectives may be summarized as follows. Fundamental principles and rights are the precondition of decent work, while employment or work with quality and security is the content, and social dialogue is the process whereby it can be achieved. We operationalize the concept of decent work from psychological perspective. For this, we focus on the perception of the workers as they are one of the stakeholders, and we also did not find records or references that this perception was already contained in other measures or indicators used in other science, for example, economy, or even in the ILO studies. The objective was to propose a measure that would complement the existing studies. We work in the field of work, organization, and personal psychology, and we think that it can help to broaden and deepen studies on this topic. Decent work perception can be related and interpreted through work, organization, and personal psychology paradigm. Well, in this study, we want to understand this relation, the relation among decent work or between decent work and work motivation, and decent work and psych. And we think that this study, or understanding these relations, would expand our knowledge of the nomological network of decent work concept and its practical implication. I I talk about decent work, and now I can talk a little bit about psychological capital. And we can define psychological capital as an individual's positive psychological state of development characterized by being confident to assume challenging tasks, using the necessary effort to accomplishment and succeed. And we can call that self-efficacy. Think positive about the results and the future, and we call that as optimism. Persisting toward goals, expecting the best, and this is we know that like as hope, and overcoming adversities in order to succeed, and we can call that resilience. We study work motivation according to self-determination theory, and we talk a little bit about FAOTA up in the next slides. Our objective: we want to analyze the relationship between decent work, work motivation, psychological capital among knowledge workers in Portugal and Brazil. In our sample, we have 2,912 knowledge workers and 1,327 from Portugal and 1,585 from Brazil. In this slide, we can see the professional groups of these knowledge workers, and in the Portuguese sample, the most part of our participants are lawyers, and in Brazilian sample, we can see that the most professional group was researchers. In this slide, we can see in this table we have the age groups range, with the preponderant participation of the age group of 36 to 50. About educational level distribution, knowledge workers are high-skilled professionals, and this is represented in oversampling of master's and PhD degrees, and we can see that in this table. About the instruments that we applied, we applied the decent work questionnaire. This instrument has 31 items, 7 dimensions or factors, and I will describe these dimensions in the next slide. Response options in 5-point Likert scale, and Cronbach alpha in Portuguese sample was 0.92, and in Brazilian sample 0.93. This is only for the global decent work. In the next slide, we will see the others, Cronbach alpha for dimensions. Well, here we can see all the 7 dimensions of decent work questionnaire, and these dimensions are facets or different aspects of decent work, and we can see all the Cronbach alphas of these dimensions. And about the description of each factor or each dimension, fundamental principles and values at work, we can describe that as a dimension that put together justice, dignity, freedom, fair treatment at work, acceptance without discrimination at work, clarity of norms, trust, solidarity, participation, and mental health. The second, adequate working time and workload, is a dimension that Gator items about decent management of time at work and good balance between working time and time for family and personal life. The fulfilling and productive work, our 30 dimension. Talk about perception that work contributes to the future of new generations, of a connection between work and personal and professional development, and between work and fulfillment, personal and professional. Work is seen as a true creation of value to multiple stakeholders and is recognized as worthwhile. Meaningful remuneration for the exercise of citizenship is a dimension that talk about perceptions that the remuneration received for the work allows the worker to live life with autonomy and dignity, to provide well-being of those depending on the worker, a feeling of personal well-being and a perception of fairness associated with what is earned. The dimension social protection is about perception of being socially protected in case of illness or loss of work for both the worker and the family and their family through a system of social security and the prospect of decent retirement. This dimension expresses the worker expectation of what society will or can do in long term of recognize or repay the worker to committed effort at work. The dimension of opportunity talk about perception of the viability of a worker creating this his or her own job, or the idea of entrepreneurship, personal employability, and the perspective for compensation, income or benefits to grow, related to hope or optimism for a better future through actions in work or through work. Dimension health and safety talk about perception of being protected from risks to physical health and of having safe environmental condition of the workplace. And this is the description of the 7 decent work factors or dimensions. Well, the second instrument applied was multidimensional work motivation scale, and this instrument has 19 items, 6 dimensions, and response options ranging from among 7 points Likert scales. The Cronbach alpha we can see in the next slide here. And I also talk about a little bit about each dimension. All this framework, we use the framework of self-determination theory, and according to the self-determination theory, a motivation is the lack of self-determination at work. The material work motivation talk about work done expecting material external reward or avoiding punishment that can be administered by others. The social work motivation talk about work done expecting social external rewards or avoiding punishment that can be also administered by others. The introject regulation or introject work motivation talk about internal pressure forces drive the regulation of work done. For example, guilty, shame, or ego involvement. identify work motivation, talk about the work done for identification with its meaning of or value, activity done for the instrumental value that it represents, and intrinsic motivation is the more autonomous work motivation, and talk about work done for interest and pleasure. And here we can see that the alphas, the Cronbach alpha of each level of work motivation. The third instrument applied was psychological capital questionnaire. And this instrument has 24 items, 4 dimensions, and response options range 6-point Likert scale. Cronbach alpha, we use only the overall psycap with 0.193 for both samples. And we'll pass to results. We structure of the results into main parts. First, we examined relationship between decent work and work motivation, performing canonical correlation analysis. In the second part, we related decent work to psychological capital, performing multiple regression analysis. In this table, we can see the results of canonical correlation analysis of the relationship of decent work factors and levels of work motivation. And here we can see the results for Brazilian sample. We can see we had 4 canonical functions statistically significant, but only the first and the second canonical function attain non-trivial values. And for this, we interpreted only the first and the second canonical functions. The same happened to Portuguese sample. We have 4 statistically significant canonical functions, but only the first and the second canonical function attain non-trivial values. And we can see that in overall canonical correlation, RC, with 0.62 and 0.33. Here, it's a table when we can see first canonical variate. The first column we have the set 1 with the 7 decent work dimensions, and the set 2 with the 6 dimensions or the 6 factors of work motivation. The second column we have the results of Brazilian sample, and the third we have the results of Portuguese sample. And we put in bold and highlighted the main and the significant dimensions for each canonical function. In the first canonical variate for the 2 samples, we have the participation of the fundamental principles and values at work, the first dimension of decent work, fulfilling productive work, and opportunities for Brazilian sample. Opportunities not attain the cutoff of 0.45 in Portuguese sample. And in the set of work motivation dimensions, we have the participation of the amotivation in the negative or opposite way, and identify motivation and intrinsic motivation in the same direction of the decent work dimensions. It means that when fundamental principles and values at work, fulfilling productive work, and opportunities increase, identify motivation and intrinsic motivation, and decrease amotivation. In the second canonical variate, this table shows the results for Brazilian sample and Portuguese sample, and we see a little difference in these two canonical functions because health and safe participates for the second canonical function in Brazilian sample and not for Portuguese sample. But in the set 2, in work motivation dimension, we have the same dimension participating is extrinsic material work motivation. Results about the relationship between decent work and psychiatry. Main results from multiple regression analysis. There are 4 statistically significant relationships between decent work dimensions and psychiatry for the Brazilian sample and the same for the Portuguese sample. For the 2 samples, we have 4 statistically significant relationships. Here we can see in this table the results of linear regression analysis between decent work factors and psychiatry for Brazilian sample. And we see fundamental principle and values at work, fulfilling and productive work, meaningful remuneration for the exercise of citizenship and opportunities. They were the dimensions that express statistically significant relation with psychological capital. And for Portuguese sample, were the same dimensions. The factor 1, factor 3, factor 4, and 6 of decent work showed a statistical significant relationship with psychological capital. In sum, mainly, the decent work dimension, fulfilling productive work, was positively related to intrinsic identified work motivation and negatively to motivation. A second canonical correlation variate or function associated negatively social protection and extrinsic material work motivation in the 2 samples with a little differences. Decent work could be an important predictor of work motivation and psychological capital. Results from regression analysis support the idea that decent work promotes psychological capital, and decent work could be an important predictor of psychological capital, mainly fulfilling and productive work, opportunities, fundamental principles and values at work, and meaningful remuneration for the exercise of citizenship. Limitations and recommendations for future research. We examined the intuitive link between decent work and work motivation, and between decent work and psychiatry. We had, in our sample, we had oversampling of high-skilled workers, and for future studies, we think that it's good to replicate our research in other professional groups. And to give continuity with new studies, it's also relevant to apply this design or similar designs in other cultures. Apply qualitative research can add important inputs to better understand the relation between variables. Longitudinal designs could offer more information about causal mechanisms and about change in level of decent work, work motivation, psychological capital over time. And longitudinal designs could also bring important data concerning life cycle changes in the relevance of decent work dimensions throughout life. Conclusion, final consideration. Decent work is a relevant concept, and we are just in the beginning of the research on this subject from a work, organizational, and personal psychology perspective. This study provides evidence that the presence of decent work is able to encourage intrinsic and identify work motivation, to avoid amotivation, and contribute to increase psychological capital. Acknowledgments. We would like to thank to all respondents who participate in the studies, and thank you for the attention. Obrigada e bem-ajam todos os participantes, all the participants. It's all. Questions? We have here the references.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so interesting, and you did such a great job. I just think it's fascinating how you put this whole study together in a collaboration. I would like to know, were there any surprises in the study? Did anything surprise you?
Surprise.
Something, anything that you didn't anticipate? We'll put Nuno on too. Nuno, if you want to speak, that would be great.
Okay, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Did you find any surprises? Anything unexpected?
Maybe the word surprise is not the best expression for expressing our feelings regarding the results.
Okay.
I think that maybe is more to uncover some relationship that could be anticipated, but not in the small differences and small relationship, in small aspects, in more specific aspects. For instance, for us, anticipate the first canonical variate linking fundamental principles and values at work, fulfilling and productive work, and opportunities as determinant variables with a motivation negatively, and identified and intrinsic work motivation is an interesting result. Anyway, I hardly could say that is a surprise, that because it's not a surprise, but is an important finding. An important finding for us, because it's clear that among the 7 decent work dimensions, why these ones are more related with the more autonomous forms of work motivation. Why? And why opportunities is only present in one of the samples and not in both. Okay, so I think that my feelings regarding the results are more the interesting results that help us to understand in a fine, more accurate aspect the relationship between the concepts.
Thank you so much. The other couple of questions I was thinking about, and you use that, and Tanya used that for the future. What do you anticipate you would find, and this is just hypothesizing, a difference in not the same high-skilled workers? Like you mentioned that your sample, you were oversampled by high-skilled workers. What would happen, do you think, anticipating, doing the study with a different population? What you might find?
This study was a part of a major research project dedicated or about knowledge workers.
Right, but you mentioned that you were oversampled by high-skilled workers.
Yeah.
What would happen if you had, I'll just use the expression, low-skilled workers?
Yes, I think your question is very interesting and challenging. We can anticipate that maybe for workers with lower levels of skills of education, maybe we could expect that fulfilling and productive work and opportunities maybe could be less related with intrinsic and identified work motivation. I don't know if I'm right. Anyway, I think that while fundamental principles and values at work are maybe more universal and people feel fundamental principles and values at work everywhere, every place, always. I think that the conditions for becoming important, fulfilling and productive work opportunities, and identified and intrinsic work motivation or autonomous forms of work motivation, maybe this relationship requires a specific, we can say, a condition of development, of personal development, that maybe lower skilled workers could not yet achieve. Maybe, I don't know.
That's very interesting. Tanya, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that Nuno explained very well what we think about the possibilities about the difference between the high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers.
Great.
If may I clarify another thing?
Sure. Oh yes, please.
Okay, the sample, the oversampling of knowledge workers, of high-skilled workers, is the result of our sampling strategy. Thinking that decent work is a sensible concept, and we could face some resistance from organizations to allow us to collect the data regarding decent work in their corporations. Maybe we thought that it could be better to approach the respondents through through professional associations like professional orders and universities, and some corporations that have available the email address of the high-skilled workers, and we approach them directly, and that is the reason why we have the high-skilled workers in our sample. Okay.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that. Now let me ask one more question, and this has been absolutely fascinating. So you mentioned as another future study to look at other cultures, other countries. Okay, I'm from the United States. What do you think you would find maybe different in, say, the United States than, Brazil or Portugal?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that that is a very interesting point. Anyway, I think that since we are using a questionnaire measuring the perception, we can have the same response for different objective conditions, considering that the cultures vary, and I can give an example. In a culture with low power distance, I can expect that the perception of fundamental principles and values at work, namely regarding the participation in decisions, maybe the same objective condition can produce in a high power distance culture the perception that I'm not participating enough, and in I'm participating enough, and in a lower power distance culture I'm not participating enough. So while decent work expresses universal values, the way the universal values are put into practice, are expressed, is sensible to cultural differences. Okay, so I think that our questionnaire don't grasp the cultural differences in terms of the objective conditions. Anyway, we can expect that United States is a culture more oriented to entrepreneurship and to risk, to challenge, and that could bring some differences in the results of what, for instance, the dimension opportunities maybe has a stronger relationship with identified and intrinsic work motivation. I could expect that relating, thinking in terms of a culture of entrepreneurship and high individualism, like such the United States culture.
Thank you. Really fascinating. I'd love to see a similar study conducted in the United States to see if your hypotheses are correct. So any last thoughts as we conclude the webinar? This has been absolutely fascinating. Tanya or Nuno, any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Okay, Tanya.
Yet about the cultural
differences
studies in future. Another perspective is that we think that the 7 dimensions of decent work probably what we think is that probably the 7 dimensions will keep the same. We will have the same 7 dimensions, but like the difference when we study social psychology, we see the difference between values and attitudes. And values is a core, and values we have values is a core, and attitudes will have a little bit difference among cultures. And when we apply the decent work questionnaire in different cultures, what we can maybe what you can find is the same 7 dimensions, but with little differences. This difference maybe will be influenced by culture or by values or attitudes, cultural attitudes or behavior.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can add that we are undertaken. We are undertaking some further studies on decent work, and one important is the validation of the questionnaire in different cultures. We are in the process of validating in Italy, in Spain, and in United Kingdom and Indonesia. These are the 4 countries that we are already working on for having an English and a Spanish and Italian and Indonesian version of the decent work questionnaire. Maybe after that we can undertake other studies on the same point. I think also that the decent work concept is very interesting because it's a concept that integrates the research traditions of several areas of work-related studies, and that is also aligned with the international and world policy for work. So we are happy to be working on this topic and expect to have other results, interesting results in future regarding the relationship of decent work with other variables and mainly the determinants of decent work.
Well, thank you both so very much, and I hope when you finish those other studies that you'll send your manuscript to be published at work. We'd be very proud to put it in the review process. So thank you for joining us, both of you. And this is Karen Jacobs signing off with this Learn at Work webinar. And we hope you'll join us for future ones. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.